Welcome to our newest episode about the Chernobyl accident. Subscribe our channel and enjoy. The Chernobyl disaster was a catastrophic event that occurred on a fateful day, April 26, 1986. At the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant in Ukraine, something went terribly wrong at the number 4 reactor. The event is often described as a nightmare come to life, a tragedy that changed the world forever. The nuclear reactor was located in a stark, utilitarian complex of concrete buildings and metal machinery. It was a place where science and technology met to produce electricity and progress. But on that day, everything changed. The reactor, which was supposed to be a source of power, became a source of death and destruction. The Chernobyl disaster occurred during a late-night test of the reactor's cooling system. The test was part of an ongoing effort to improve the safety of the reactor, which was located at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant in Ukraine. The test was designed to simulate a power outage, in which the reactor would be shut down and its cooling systems would need to continue working to prevent overheating. However, a series of errors and design flaws led to a catastrophic chain reaction in the reactor core, causing a massive explosion and fire. The explosion destroyed the reactor building and released large amounts of radioactive materials into the atmosphere. The immediate impact of the explosion was devastating, causing the deaths of 2 plant workers and injuring many others. The explosion also led to a fire that burned for days, releasing even more radioactive materials into the atmosphere. The impact of the disaster was not limited to the immediate area around the plant. The radioactive materials released by the explosion were carried by the wind and spread over a wide area, contaminating farmland, forests, and even entire cities. The impact of the disaster was felt as far away as Western Europe, where elevated levels of radiation were detected in the atmosphere. The accident during the late-night test of the reactor's cooling system was the start of one of the worst nuclear disasters in history, with far-reaching and long-lasting consequences for the environment, human health, and the nuclear industry as a whole. The explosion that occurred that day was a violent and chaotic event. The reactor itself was completely destroyed, with debris scattered across the surrounding area. The explosion and subsequent fire released a plume of radioactive particles into the air, spreading them across much of Western USSR and Europe. The smoke and flames from the reactor lit up the sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the landscape. The sound of the explosion echoed through the surrounding area, a deafening roar that shattered the silence of the night. The area around the power plant was immediately plunged into chaos. Workers scrambled to contain the damage, but it was too late. The radiation had already spread, contaminating the soil, water, and air. Nearby towns and villages were evacuated, with families fleeing their homes in a desperate bid to escape the danger. The aftermath of the disaster was a bleak and desolate landscape. The area around the power plant was now a ghost town, with abandoned buildings and empty streets. The only signs of life were the animals that had taken over the area, scavenging for food and shelter. Despite the danger, scientists and workers continued to brave the contaminated area to try and contain the radiation. They wore protective gear and carried Geiger counters, trying to measure the levels of radiation and prevent it from spreading further. The Chernobyl disaster was one of the worst nuclear disasters in history, and its impact was felt far beyond the borders of Ukraine. The release of radioactive particles into the air had immediate and far-reaching consequences, forcing the evacuation of more than 300,000 people from a 30-kilometer exclusion zone around the plant. The evacuation was a massive undertaking, with families forced to leave their homes and belongings behind in a matter of hours. The roads leading out of the exclusion zone were clogged with cars and buses, as people scrambled to get as far away as possible from the danger. As they drove away, many people looked back at their homes and communities, not knowing when or if they would ever be able to return. The landscape was desolate and eerie, with abandoned buildings and empty streets stretching out into the distance. The people who had been forced to leave behind their homes were filled with a sense of loss and uncertainty. They had no idea what the future held or how they would rebuild their lives. They were separated from their friends and families, and the places that they had known and loved for generations were now off limits. In the years since the disaster, many people have returned to the exclusion zone, determined to rebuild their lives and reclaim their homes. But the area is still contaminated with radiation, and the long-term effects of exposure are a constant threat. The evacuation of more than 300,000 people from the exclusion zone was a stark reminder of the awesome power of nuclear energy and the need for caution and responsibility. It was a tragic event that changed the lives of countless people forever. But it was also a testament to the resilience and determination of the human spirit, as people worked to rebuild their lives in the aftermath of the disaster. The environmental impact of the Chernobyl disaster was catastrophic, with far-reaching consequences that are still being felt today. One of the most visible and striking effects was the creation of the Red Forest, an eerie, haunting sight that stands as a stark reminder of the power of radiation. The Red Forest was once a vibrant and lush forest, filled with trees and wildlife. But after the disaster, the trees were exposed to extremely high levels of radiation, and they began to die off in large numbers. As the trees died, their leaves turned a deep shade of red, giving the forest its name. The Red Forest was a chilling sight, with dead trees stretching out as far as the eye could see. The silence was almost palpable, broken only by the occasional sound of birds and animals that had not yet succumbed to the radiation. The creation of the Red Forest was just one of the many environmental impacts of the disaster. The radiation contaminated the soil, water, and air, affecting plants, animals, and humans alike. The area around the plant became a desolate, uninhabitable wasteland, with only the hardiest of organisms able to survive. The long-term effects of the radiation on the environment are still being studied, but it is clear that the impact will be felt for many years to come. The creation of the Red Forest stands as a haunting reminder of the power of nuclear energy and the need for caution and responsibility. It is a symbol of the devastating impact that human actions can have on the natural world, and a warning of the dangers that lie ahead if we do not take action to protect our planet. After the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, one of the most urgent tasks was to contain the damaged reactor and prevent further releases of radioactive materials. To achieve this, a massive construction project was launched to build a concrete sarcophagus around the damaged reactor. The construction of the sarcophagus was a daunting task, with workers exposed to high levels of radiation as they worked to build the structure. But after months of work, the sarcophagus was completed in November 1986. The massive structure covered the damaged reactor, containing the radiation and preventing further releases into the environment. Despite the completion of the sarcophagus, concerns remained about its stability and the potential for further releases of radiation. In response to these concerns, a new containment structure was designed and built in the years that followed. Known as the new safe confinement, this massive structure was designed to slide over the existing sarcophagus, creating a new, more secure containment structure around the damaged reactor. The construction of the new safe confinement was a massive undertaking, involving thousands of workers and engineers from around the world. Finally, in 2016, the new safe confinement was completed and slid into place over the damaged reactor. The structure is designed to contain the radiation for at least 100 years, giving scientists and engineers time to develop new technologies for the safe handling and disposal of the radioactive materials. The completion of the new safe confinement was a major milestone in the ongoing efforts to manage the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster. It represents the culmination of years of hard work and dedication by countless people, and a commitment to ensuring the safety and security of future generations. The Chernobyl disaster was a wake-up call for the world, highlighting the dangers of nuclear energy and the need for improved safety regulations and procedures. In the aftermath of the disaster, significant changes were made to nuclear safety standards around the world. Governments and regulatory bodies around the world conducted safety reviews of their own nuclear power plants, identifying potential risks and implementing new safety measures. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, also launched a comprehensive review of nuclear safety standards, leading to the development of new guidelines and regulations for nuclear power plants worldwide. One of the most significant changes was the adoption of ANQUAT, Defense in Depth and QUAT, approach to nuclear safety. This approach involves multiple layers of safety systems, each designed to prevent or mitigate a potential accident. The goal is to create ANQUAT, safety net and QUAT, that can prevent a catastrophic accident from occurring, even in the face of multiple system failures. Other changes included improvements in emergency response plans, better training for nuclear plant operators, and increased public awareness of nuclear safety issues. Governments and regulatory bodies also put in place more stringent regulations around the design, construction, and operation of nuclear power plants, with a focus on preventing accidents before they occur. The Chernobyl disaster was a tragic event, but it also served as a catalyst for change in the nuclear industry. The changes that were made in response to the disaster have helped to improve the safety of nuclear power plants around the world, and have made nuclear energy a safer and more reliable source of power for the future. The long-term health effects of the Chernobyl disaster are indeed still being studied, and it is unclear how many people will ultimately be affected by the radiation release. The disaster caused immediate deaths and injuries, as well as long-term health effects that may last for generations. The most immediate and obvious health effects of the disaster were suffered by the emergency responders and workers who were exposed to high levels of radiation in the immediate aftermath of the accident. Many of these workers suffered from acute radiation sickness, which can cause symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, hair loss, and skin burns. The most severely affected workers died within a few weeks of the accident. However, the long-term health effects of the disaster are more difficult to quantify. The radiation release is known to have increased the risk of cancer, particularly thyroid cancer, among people who were exposed to the radiation. The exact number of people who will develop cancer as a result of the disaster is unknown, but estimates range from a few thousand to tens of thousands. Other health effects that have been linked to the radiation release include cardiovascular disease, cataracts, and cognitive impairment. The impact of the radiation release on mental health has also been studied, with some studies suggesting that the disaster may have led to an increase in depression and anxiety among affected populations. Overall, the long-term health effects of the Chernobyl disaster are still being studied, and it may be many years before the full extent of the damage is known. What is clear, however, is that the disaster had a significant impact on the health of many people in the region, and that the effects of the radiation release may be felt for generations to come. Thank you for watching, subscribe our channel and see you in next episodes.